the Sixers beat up on the Celtics the other night. Keith, I know you were into that one and watching what was going on. And when we watch those two teams play currently, bad night for the Celtics, or do we see a mismatch?
A little bit of both. I think Boston was they were really sloppy with the ball. I want to say they finished with 22 turnovers in the game, and that's very unlike them. They don't turn it over like that. I mean, nobody does, but that's extremely unlike them. But yeah, Philly's a better team than the Celtics are right now. They've got more depth. Their roster fits better really well, especially with Embiid back in there. And the Celtics have no answer for him at all. So yeah, it's a bit of a mismatch, but it's probably not as much of one as the game played out to be. I think Boston can definitely play better and keep it closer, but I would not favor them against Philly at any point the rest of the season.
How did this take a turn so quickly? I mean, it's funny. These two teams have been kind of linked together since that Fultz trade, and everybody here would say, man, that Boston team, they didn't have to do what the Sixers did. They're going in the right direction. They've got everything going for them. And now 1 year after getting swept by the Celtics, it looks like these two teams are heading in opposite directions. What happened?
Yeah, I think this year is a bit of an aberration for Boston. They've had more games lost due to COVID than any team in the league, and it's by a pretty good margin too. It's they have had just about every player on the roster, and including a couple guys who have now since been traded out due to that. So I think that's caused them issues. But they also, as they have lost high-end guys like Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, they have replaced them for the most part with younger players. And that's caused them some issue. Whereas, Philly built up around their young guys and then built a lot of veteran depth around them, which has allowed them to push this thing forward and really get to a good place. The Celtics have hung on to all their draft picks. They've used all of those picks for the most part, and that's got them in a spot where they're very, very reliant on players who are in their first couple years and maybe third year for a couple guys, and that's really causing them some issues. So I think that's what we're starting to see now, is that's where that lack of veteran depth plays out. Now, Evan Fournier gets back. He's out due to COVID at the moment, but once he's back, that may start to rebalance for the Celtics a little bit, but this has been kind of a lost year for them.
You've seen a lot of Joel Embiid. We've talked about him over the years. The Joel Embiid you saw on Tuesday night, how much different or better is this version than the previous incarnations of Joel Embiid you've seen?
Yeah, it's very, very different. There's a couple things that immediately come to mind. The first is he's able to play deep into games now and still be an effective player. It used to be for most of his career that by the time he got about midway through the third quarter, he was really settling only for jump shots. He wasn't getting inside. Defensively, he wasn't having the impact he was because the conditioning just wasn't there. And you can see that's working back a little bit right now coming off the injury. But this season, he's really got his conditioning into a great place, and that's allowed him to play deeper into these games as an effective player. And then the other thing that I think he's really improved on is now he almost welcomes those double teams. You can still catch him occasionally, but that's every big in the league. But for the most part, he sees it coming. He welcomes it in, and then he gets the ball moving. He's not racking up assists out of those, but what he is doing is he's getting the ball out, getting it moving, and then he's not becoming a passive observer after he passes. He's getting himself in position for rebounds, or he's reposting himself, or he's moving to the opposite side of the floor, and those kind of things. And I think those are major, major, major improvements in his game, which is why he's putting together an MVP caliber season.
Now, we've talked a lot about this team and their roster configuration over the years. Can Ben and Joel coexist? They've had clunky teams like the one last year with Al Horford that couldn't shoot, with Josh Richardson. They had the team that they threw together with Jimmy Butler a couple of years ago. Of all the teams with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, is this one the best put together?
I think so. I think the names might not be the big names that people are used to, but the fit is so much better. When you have guys like Danny Green and Seth Curry in your lineup, they really help you rebalance things. And Curry is the guy who, yeah, can he be picked on defensively? Sure, a little bit, but he's got enough good defenders around him that you can make that work. And if it gets to be a real problem, you just take him off the floor. And then Green has been really, really good as far as a 3-and-D presence on the wing. He gives them a little bit of a bigger defender that they can put on guys that Curry maybe doesn't handle quite as well, and that really works out. And then coming off the bench, they've added just enough guys that I think really make sense for them, and Matisse Thybulle's growing into a bigger role. It's good to see him confidently shooting the ball, even if it's not going in at a super high rate yet. That I think that's going to come. It looks like he's really working on a shot and getting himself to a better place there. So, yeah, I think they're really rounding things out. I said the other day on Twitter after they beat Boston, after I rewatched the game, feels like they're one player short in the rotation, maybe a big man. And I know a lot of people, came back with, well, they don't have George Hill, but it's hard to count George Hill when you haven't had him all year. It's kind of like you don't know what to expect out of that. I think he's certainly going to help them quite a bit. But if they could get one more big man, I think now you're protected if anything happens to Embiid, and they're really, really in a roster that fits well together. And I think that's going to be the difference between making a deeper playoff run and being out early like they have been the last couple of years.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit, over the years that they've been in the playoffs. Even when Embiid has had his issues, he had the 1 year with the mask on, and he was had the gastroenteritis the 1 year, and last year they were just a disaster. Anytime they went to the bench, it was a mess for them. With Dwight Howard, do you feel like that is going to be a weakness still? Is Dwight Howard, playoff Dwight Howard playing, 8 to 12, 15 minutes, has that closed that hole up a little bit?
Yeah, I think it has, and that's the important part there is you don't need Dwight to be great for 25 minutes. You need him to be good for 8 minutes, 10 minutes a game, and I think that's the important part. Let Embiid, now I think he can, handle 38 to 40 minutes a game if you really need that out of him, and then that means you just need to get Howard to go out there and defend, rebound when he's out of the game, play hard, and that's really all you need. So I think they're in a really good place behind him, better than they have been for a number of years, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I know that this East, everybody's going Brooklyn. Harden going to be out at least 10. Durant's been in and out. They really only played about 8 games together, but they look really good last night, even shorthanded. Is it, as you watch them more and more, even shorthanded, what kind of opinion are we formulating? I think a lot of people think, well, they're going to win this thing anyway because when they get all 3 together, but can you just throw all 3 together? Do they need all 3? I mean, what is your take on what this Nets team is? Because it's been such a difficult team to kind of comprehend the way they're constructed and with who's in and out night to night.
Yeah, and this goes back to where we talked about fit. I think they're clearly going to be very, very good. But I think you want to get at least 10, 12 games if you can with all 3 of those guys in the lineup. Especially ideally, you'd like to play a couple close games into the fourth quarter. So what you can do then is get a sense of, all right, what's our pecking order? Who's going to have the ball? Where are you going to be on the floor? And those kind of things, because that is important. You don't want to have the first time you're experiencing that in the postseason, because that has the potential to be a problem for you. So I think what you're really looking at with Brooklyn is the defense still has holes, and it still has some pretty big problems, especially up front. Their wing defense can kind of come and go. So that's where I think Philadelphia and Milwaukee, they still have a chance because they don't have really good answers. It's not that anybody does, but they really don't have answers for Embiid or for Giannis and guys like that. And I think those guys can really do a lot towards helping them get there. And the way those 2 teams play defense, you're not going to stop Brooklyn, but if you can slow them down and make them work a little bit, keep it, 100 to 110 points versus 120 to 130 points, you're going to give yourself a chance. And I think Philadelphia and Milwaukee have the opportunity to do that. And then of course, you got to factor in the health track record isn't great for that Brooklyn team either. Harden's probably the guy you can trust the most to be there and be healthy. The other 2, Durant, Irving, they've had enough issues that at least that's something you have to be at least somewhat concerned about.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you watched Embiid the other night taking on that, it was kind of an undermanned Boston team size-wise. I mean, it was just, it was kind of funny. At one point, you had Ojale at 6'6" defending him. You had Taco Fall, who's a foot taller, trying his hand. He fouled Williams out of the game. When you see Brooklyn and Milwaukee, I know they have a little bit more size, but is that going to be the ultimate problem for these teams is man, I just saw him carve up Boston with no size. What is Brooklyn and Milwaukee going to do with him?
Yeah, it's definitely got a chance to be tough. Now, I think Brooklyn has a little bit better of a chance because Brook Lopez is a really good defender. He's done fairly well against Embiid at points. PJ Tucker is the kind of guy you can kind of throw on Embiid, and he'll annoy him at least because he'll be up and underneath him the whole time, and that's something that he still doesn't really like to have. But that those are guys you're kind of saying, all right, let's make him work for his 20 and 10. Brooklyn, they don't really have a good answer for him at all. It's certainly not LaMarcus Aldridge at this point in his career. It's not DeAndre Jordan. Their best bet might be to play really small and then make him defend, Blake Griffin or Jeff Green or somebody like that out on the perimeter, which then that makes them expend energy on the defensive end. And then maybe hopefully you get to a point where, all right, instead of him getting down to the post and really banging with guys, he's settling for those 15 to 25-foot jumpers, and that might be your best bet if you're the Nets.
All right, Keith Smith, the NBA, about a month and a half left in the season. By the way, George Hill says he anticipates coming back and playing, just no timeline. Doc Rivers said about 10 games. So that would keep him out the rest of this month for the most part. So we'll see how that all works for the Sixer people out there. But they are currently number 2 in the East. Milwaukee is number 3. And then it's a mess with Charlotte, Atlanta, Miami, Boston, and the Knicks. Pacers are the first team out. So when you look at that group there, which of those other teams, in your mind, is in the mix still, has a shot to be in that Final Four and win one of those second-round series?
Yeah, it's hard to give up on Boston and Miami because I think they've been there, done that. So until they don't do that in the playoffs, you kind of want to go in there and say, hey, if they're healthy and they're finally, there for the first time this year, because neither team has had their lineup together the way they really envisioned it all year long. If they can get there by the time the playoffs come around, those are the two teams I think you could look at and say, hey, they can still cause some problems. Because you even saw a point, even though Philadelphia controlled the game from, basically halftime on, that the Celtics give them some unique matchup issues. They don't have the answers for all the guys that Boston can run out there offensively, and that was without Fournier, who's going to make a pretty big difference. So, and the Celtics have beaten the Bucks. The Nets, that's been a different story for them. Miami's had success against those teams in the past. So those are the only two teams. The other teams, I mean, their best bet against the top 3 teams is that, maybe they just don't take them serious. You can still win or two and turn it into a series. But I don't think there's any real contenders out of that group outside of maybe Boston and Miami. And I'm even doubtful on those two.
All right. You look at the West, you've got 2 newcomers. I mean, Utah has been decent. They've been good. They're the number 1 seed and the best team in the league right now. But you got Phoenix in there as well. And I don't know. When you put those 2 teams, are you ready to say that one of those 2 teams, and they played a great game last night, maybe the game of the year, that was fantastic. Are you ready to say one of those 2 teams is the favorite in the West?
I wouldn't go that far. I still want to see, the Lakers healthy. If they're healthy, I think it should still be them. And it's not by a, overwhelming margin, though. I think the Clippers still deserve that respect. In Denver, after a slow start to the season, the Nuggets have really come on. They're playing great since acquiring Aaron Gordon. They've got pretty good depth up and down their roster. So I think Denver's going to be a tough out. And then, Portland's a team where they don't play enough defense to really take them overly serious. But nobody wants to go against. He could win a game or two pretty much by himself. And then if that happens, now all of a sudden you're one bad shooting night away from being in a game 7 where anything can happen. So you could really convince me that any of those top 6 teams in the West could make a run. I'm probably a little lower on Portland than the rest, but the other 5, I'd give them about even odds to get out of the West because I think they're all just about that equal.
Yeah, that should be one of the more interesting things because obviously with LeBron out, it's hard to kind of count them out. But, man, they're going to be in like a Brooklyn situation of how much is that team going to be, how much ball are they going to get before the end of the season here. So we'll see what happens out West. But that West is kind of going to be a pretty fun one with Denver starting to play a lot better all of a sudden too. those two teams, the Jazz and the Suns. So it felt like the West, it's, I don't know. Do you feel it's as deep as it has been in the past?
Yeah, I do. I think it is. I think they've got really good depth in the Western Conference. Like you said, those 5 teams are as good as anybody at the top of the conference. They're on par to me with the Eastern Conference top 3 teams. Those are the 8 teams that I would be looking at and say, all right, the champion's going to come out of one of those teams for sure. And then when you look at the kind of the bottom of the playoff picture, Dallas is tough because you got Luka Doncic. We've seen what he can do. We saw that in last year's playoffs. If the Warriors get in again, that's another one where you really don't want to be going against Stephen Curry if you can avoid it. They're certainly not what they once were, but again, he's a guy who could win a couple games almost all by himself, and that really puts you in a tough spot. The Grizzlies are playing really kind of fun and loose, and they're getting up and down the floor, and they get after it defensively. So yeah, the West has a lot of really good teams, and that's going to make for a really fun and interesting playoffs where matchups and health are going to really matter, maybe even more so than in a normal year.
All right, Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports covers the NBA, which has got about a month and a half left to go in the season. We know the Sixers are off till tomorrow. They take on the Pelicans, who have really struggled with that defense, man. 22-29, the Pelicans have lost 2 in a row. They'll play the Sixers tomorrow night, 8 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. Keith, appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'll stay safe, you and yours.
Yeah, man. Keith Smith, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline inside the Sixers, as he told you. Sixers team, as he watched Joel Embiid the other night, handful, absolute handful, and trying to get around the Eastern Conference, figuring out who the heck could defend him. That's going to be a problem.